Hey, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out, another mini-sode for you. Want to talk a little bit about fraud today, and I want to talk a little bit about protective measures that appraisers need to take, and by telling you an anecdotal story from an individual I did a coaching session with. First, want to remind you, of course, we are sponsored by ANOW Software. ANOW, of course, is the software that I use to manage my entire appraisal office. You should as well. Go to anow.com/coach. Once again, it's anow.com/coach. All right, folks. So I want to share with you just a brief story. I'm not going to get into too much detail because it is confidential, but I did get off the phone here a couple of weeks ago with an individual that I did some coaching with. Now, I want to make it very clear. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a USPAP instructor. I've never served on a state board. So she contacted me to get my advice, and I made it very clear to her that this would just be my opinion. But it was based on what I've seen in the marketplace and what I've seen with other appraisers and what my anecdotal experience has been. I'm just going to give you the gist of it. In fact, I'm just going to give you the very bare bones to help protect her anonymity. She received a phone call from the state indicating that they were investigating her on a particular report, and they used the word fraud. And her question was, should I lawyer up? And, of course, my advice to her was, number one, contact your E&O company. That's the very first step that you should take. And number two, contact Tim Anderson in Florida, who is well-versed in USPAP and helps defend appraisers against state board complaints. And he is excellent at what he does. And I said, number three, I think because they used the word fraud, that you need to lawyer up. It's one thing to go to E&O, and it's another thing to go to Tim. When they're starting to throw around the word fraud, and which is what they did, she confirmed to me that's what they had done. I very much encouraged her to lawyer up. Fraud is the difference between slap on the hand, the difference between maybe a financial penalty and jail time. And I'm being very serious about this. When people start talking about fraud, that is a criminal offense, and that's when you need to lawyer up and be very, 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 very careful. I want to use an analogy, and this is an analogy I used with her. It made a lot of sense to her. I want to use it here as well so that we can all understand where these individuals are coming from. But first, I want to remind you, of course, we are sponsored by ANOW Software. ANOW is the software that I use to manage my office. What does that mean, to manage my office? Well, it means that I am keeping track of everything that goes on in my office. So payroll, appraisals, where they are, what they're doing, where they're going, all of this stuff is happening in real time on the cloud with ANOW Software. Folks, I know you've got systems out there. I know you keep track of things. And I know some of you are saying, come on, do I really need the cost of ANOW Software? And I would say, no, you need the investment of ANOW Software because it makes your life so much easier and it saves you money, folks. Think of how much time you spend trying to keep track of what's going on in your office. All of that's out the window with ANOW Software because it does it for you. Check them out. Go to anow.com/coach. Once again, it's anow.com/coach. All right, folks, we are back. We're talking today about fraud. We're talking today about when you get polled before your state board. Now, I have to make it clear that the individual that I was speaking to, that I was coaching on this situation, she gave me the details, and I thought she had nothing to worry about, honestly. That being said, I've seen things that I thought people had nothing to worry about go south very quick. In other words, just because you think there's nothing to worry about doesn't mean you shouldn't lawyer up, doesn't mean you shouldn't call your E&O, doesn't mean you shouldn't call Tim Anderson. You should do all of those things, right? But the claims that they were making were silly. They were not done in an official capacity. She did not get a letter from the state. By the way, one of the things that I coached her to do was to call the state, or to email the state rather, and ask them, is there an official complaint here? And if there is, I want a copy of it. In other words, what they had told her was verbally over the phone. But they did use the word fraud, and that was enough of a spidey senses on the back of my neck saying, that's not good. You're using that word, and maybe they were using it flippantly. But I'm sorry, you don't mess around with that word. You don't mess around with complaints from the state. Just don't screw around. Just do it right. And it's going to cost you some money to lawyer up, but do it right, folks. You don't want to put your livelihood on the line trusting that it's not that big of a deal. It is a big deal. When you're contacted by the state, let me repeat that. It is a big deal. Okay, let me give you an analogy that I gave to her, and this is kind of what I see her state probably doing to her, which I think is sad. On one side, it's despicable on another side. I've got a couple of buddies that serve on the Idaho State police force. When I say buddies, these are individuals I don't hang out with and have beers with. But these are people that I've done. I was going to say I've done time with. I've spent a lot of time with, and I like these guys. Both of them are good individuals. I think they're good cops. They're not your typical, badge and a gun, cocky attitude cops. They're friends. They're friends of mine. And on a pretty regular basis, just because I'm curious, I ask them certain things, and I say, hey, I've got a radar detector. Hypothetically, what does that do to me in a traffic stop? Or, I'll just ask them different questions. Had an opportunity to talk to one of them. I'll tell you his first name. His name is Vance, a high school friend of mine. And I talked to Vance for quite a while one day about fishing expeditions. And I'm just going to boil it all down. This is a mini-sode after all. I'm going to boil it all down to basically, he said this. He said, Dustin, listen. He says, I have one of the best records on the force for finding drugs. And he says, I'll tell you how I do it. I stop people for very innocuous things, and then I start fishing. Maybe it's a broken taillight. I stop somebody for a broken taillight. I'll walk up to the window. I'll say, hey, it looks like you got a broken taillight. Let me see your registration, your driver's license. If everything is in order that way, he's going to be smelling for something in the car. He's going to be looking inside the car to see, if there's any open containers, anything that is haphazardly thrown under the seat, those types of things. And he says, I'll just ask people. He says, I get to know them. I play the good cop. And then I just say, hey, do you mind if I search your car real quick? And most people will say, shoot, I guess I don't have anything to hide. They're not saying this out loud. They're saying this in their head. And they're like, sure, go ahead. Well, guess what? He freely admitted. He said, hey, listen, I had no business searching anybody's car. But once I ask them and they give consent, by golly, I'm going to go to town. And he says, that's where I find stuff. People don't want to say no to cops. They don't want to say no to authorities. So they say yes, hoping that they won't find anything, but thinking that if they say no, I don't want you to search my car, that they're going to be suspicious. He says it's just silly. Now, maybe I'm sharing too much here, but Vance told me, he says, hey, listen, if I ask somebody to search their car and they say no, and I don't have probable cause, I'm not going to wait for a warrant. I'm not going to call a drug dog in. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, okay, well, thank you. And he says, if a cop asks to search your car, tell them no. You don't have anything to lose. Tell them no. You have everything to lose when you tell them yes, right? Okay, so folks, stick with me. What I'm trying to get at is the same tactic I see cops using to go on these fishing expeditions where, a simple taillight turns into a drug charge. I also see state boards sometimes doing. When you start throwing out, words like fraud, her question to me was, do I need to lawyer up? And it's not just yes, it's hell yes, and fast. You cannot afford to run into a situation that is irreversible when it comes to a not just a disciplinary action, but go to the next step in fraud. And sometimes I think the state really may not have much. And I'll just say this much about her case. As she told me what they were complaining about, I thought, really? I mean, really? Like it's not even a concern. Like something very, very silly, had nothing to do with value, certainly was not a USPAP compliant thing. And yet they're throwing around the word fraud. Folks, anytime that you get approached by a state board or any other entity that could run into problems, folks, I would not hesitate. I would do three things. I would call your E&O provider, get their idea. Now, when we say, the third thing I'm going to give you, I'll just throw it out there now, is to lawyer up. A lot of times you can do that through your E&O. Now, not necessarily with a state board complaint, but they will at least tell you what you need to do. And if you're with OREP Insurance, which is a sponsor here, they will allow you 30 minutes to talk to an individual who used to serve on a state board who will help you through that process. And that's free of charge, by the way. That's just part of the benefits of OREP Insurance. Now, the third thing that I would do, actually the second thing that I would do, I give you 1 and 3, let's give you 2, is to call Tim Anderson. Tim Anderson will help you through the process and keep you safe as much as can be in these situations. So be safe out there, appraisers. Cross your T's, dot your I's, and don't play around with fire when you're approached by a state board or any other entity that is throwing around the word fraud. You don't want to mess with that stuff, folks. You also don't want to mess around with trying to be an appraiser and a business owner at the same time without the help of the All-Star team, folks. If you're not a member of my All-Star team, please join us. Go to theappraisercoach.com, go to memberships, and join us now. It's $9 a month, folks. Well worth it. Thanks for joining me today. We'll catch you next time.